This is Rebecca Roth, and I'm going to do something a little bit different here for the next probably 5 weeks or so. So if you're listening on Spreaker.com, on Vimeo.com, I think we're on iTunes and also SoundCloud. You probably haven't heard these before. This is a program that I did for my Christmas vacation holidays. And I did a 10-part series. So what I'm gonna do for each Saturday here is give you part 1 and 2. If you want to go to my membership site, you can listen to all of them if you just can't wait. But that's how I'm gonna get them out there publicly. Next week I'll do part 3 and 4, and then 5 and 6, and then 7 and 8 until we get to all 10. And what I did was I kind of took my members, actually. This was a kind of a holiday gift in a sense. I was able to pre-record these so I could have them uploaded. So every day, the membership site, instead of getting the news over the Christmas holiday, they got deeper into 9/11 from inside the airline's perspective. So I flew for more than 30 years, and I believed everything that they told me to, until I found out that some of the hijackers were still alive. So I started looking, and as a result, I found some huge discrepancies according to airline standards, FAA protocols, and that type of thing. As I continued looking, and I published my first book in 2014, Methodical Illusion. And if you haven't read the series yet, there's now 4 of them. I'm working on the 5th, as well as a nonfiction, using the Freedom of Information Act data and other information and experience from a team of aviation experts that have joined me as a consequence of doing Coast to Coast AM with George Noory on the first book, and I did another one with the 4th book, Methodical Exposure, just released last year. So if you're interested in really getting into the 9/11 story, so you really understand what happened, you might want to read the novels. If you don't read novels, and I get a lot of email from people, I never read novels, but I read these. You can purchase them autographed and personalized at my online bookstore, and you can go to the .com for each title: Methodical Illusion, Methodical Deception, Methodical Conclusion, and Methodical Exposure. Each one's a .com, and you can go to the bookstore. If you go to behindthegalleycurtain.com, you can click on the main menu, and it'll take you to the bookstore also. And you can also order them on Kindle at Amazon and from any bookstore, actually. You can just give them the author's name, Rebecca Roth, and the title of the books. You can find all the numbers and everything you need to order them. If you prefer libraries will also order them for you. So if you don't like to accumulate books, what I'm finding, especially with airline people, but a lot of the readers are reading through the first time, digesting, and then they go back with a highlighter because there's a lot of information, and there's a lot of stuff that I built into the story, and it is a novel, so you be prepared for that. It's a novel. So I am not the main character, but the main character, Vera Hansen, is a protagonist. She's a combination of lots of people that I knew and still know, and now I'm still working with lots of people from United, American Airlines, and others, several others, even international airlines, that have brought forth more information and stories. So I think you'll enjoy it. It's a nice way of really touching with what really happened. And I think if you're paying attention to what's been going on with Russia controlling our president hoax, you'll understand more how the CIA and the FBI cover each other and are able to pull off a coup d'etat or a hoax or create something, send innocent people to jail and that sort of thing. So what I'm going to do is just give this introduction for each one of these, and you'll hear the same thing each week. If you'd like to go deeper into 9/11, you can become a member at my membership site, and it is behindthegalleycurtain.com. And it's as low as $4 a month. You can come in for 1 month, 3 months, 6 months, or 12 months. It's up to you how you want to go into that. I do a daily news, just really current event news stuff every day, breaking down some of the things that maybe the mainstream media doesn't talk about, are afraid to talk about, or quite frankly, sometimes are covering up. So I welcome you to join me over there. And for the next 5 weeks here on Spreaker, Vimeo.com, SoundCloud, everywhere, YouTube. YouTube, I usually don't mention because they've already taken my couple years of programs down, Saturday programs. And really what happened was I showed, I think this is actually somewhere located in the Spreaker, has all the audios from everything I've done. But this was a screen capture of inside the Freedom of Information Act data that I have about almost a terabyte of. So you could see that some of the files, like the terrorists supposedly voices, we have some planes, we're going back to the airport, were uploaded before the planes left Boston. So when I found stuff like that, I went, oh dear, well, we got to look a little bit deeper. And the things that I found have come out in the books, especially book 3 and 4, because by that time, I had quite a team of aviation experts joining me. And the stuff that we found was pretty, let me just say it this way, from an airline perspective, pretty frightening and pretty eye-opening. And I can see the whole thing is unfolding again, how the mainstream media, if you've never looked into Operation Mockingbird, you might want to do that, how they are very much controlled. And we were not necessarily given anything even close to the truth about 9/11. So there you go. Without further ado, I will be attaching this video to part 1 and 2. Next week, you'll probably hear the same thing to 3 and 4, and then 5 and 6, and down the line till all 10 of them are out there. Again, I hope you'll consider joining us. We have a chat room there. And if you have any questions, and we talk about the daily news and things that are going on at behindthegalleycurtain.com. And here you go. All right, this is Rebecca Roth, and this is going to be our holiday special. It's going to be a little bit different than our daily show because I want to record these so that Ramjet and I both can spend time with our families, our kids, our pets, all those things.
Our golf clubs.
Christmas trees, all of those things that we both have to do, or want to do actually, over the holidays. So what I'm going to do is record I don't know how many there's going to be, but let's just say the time period between Christmas and New Year's. I know it's about 10 days. So we're going to go in and we're going to talk about just a little bit more in depth. And I think what I'd like to do is kind of start by talking about the books and the information that kind of came through the novels in order, so that we can I can share some stuff with you guys. So, and we'll try to make these be about 30 minutes long. So, you guys don't, if you're bored and you want to get away from your family and you want to hear the Daily Show, you don't do Christmas, whatever, then we won't take up all your time anyway. So we'll try to do this, and that's what's going to happen. This will be number 1. And I'm not sure what I'll title these, something special, a deeper dive into 9/11, part 1 or something like that.
So you're saying that these are people that don't do Christmas? Are these the nudist Buddhists you've been talking about for the last
Exactly. If you're a nudist Buddhist, it's winter out, so they don't want to do anything. So anyway, first off, I guess, I think I'll pose a question to myself, and I'll answer that question. I know a lot of people have asked me this, and a lot of people have a hard time differentiating what is real. And some people even get caught up at, am I Vera? Well, I'm not Grace. So, no. So let me just kind of explain, why did I write the books as a novel, or a novel series, actually? And why did I do what I did at the beginning of Methodical Illusion? So to answer that question, I really wanted people to understand how uniquely different flight attendants are. And I know that I'll mention the gentleman that I dedicated Methodical Exposure, the 4th book, to. actually admitted this, and this kind of a cute story, and I'll share it now because he's passed on. But when somebody contacted him and told him about some of the information I had released in the first 2 books, and he did a little listening, and he couldn't believe that a flight attendant was smart enough to know about P-TECH, number one, because P-TECH, you'll remember, was the software company startup that Michael Chertoff had really helped this foreign-owned company get into 22, I believe, U.S. government computer systems. And they were working at Edwards Air Force Base with DARPA on the remote control system since the mid to late 80s. So when he found that out, it was like, wow, wait a minute. This is a flight attendant with brains. I got to meet this person. So that what do you call that? The stereotypical
well, in other words,
mindset.
He'd had Grace as a flight attendant on all the flights he'd ever taken.
That's possible. It is possible. But I got a good laugh out of it because but before he passed away this last spring, and he actually admitted to this to me a couple times. But because I had gone so deep into this, and then we went through a lot of the FOIA data together and the radar and text, and I literally was teaching myself how to be an air traffic controller. And actually, it was something I thought I was going to do when I was in high school. I had looked into it as a career. So I was, I had a draw to it anyway. But I was taking online courses, so to speak, on how to get through all of this FOIA data. So when we connected, then he admitted a few times, you might be the smartest person I've met. And I've met a lot of astronauts because he actually did land some space shuttles and then have what do you call this? Social time at a place near Edwards Air Force Base called The Office with some of them, where we would, socialize and drink beer, type of socializing, and tell stories. So I got a good laugh out of it.
Well, lots of careers, there are stereotypical types of people. For example, programmers. There's certain elements to programmers that are kind of all the same. And they don't vary much. Flight attendants and pilots, I would think, are a vast variety of people. I mean, there is maybe a stereotypical type of flight attendant that you might think of, which is the Grace type. But, I think your experience has indicated that there are a vast array of people who become flight attendants, anywhere from, former morticians to, astrophysicists.
Well, that's one reason why I wanted to bring in the real part of the airline life. And really, I think, quite frankly, Vera is kind of a combination of several different people. She's stoic. She's mature. She's a widow. So she's been around. She's senior in her, scheduling abilities, and she's nice to the younger, more junior flight attendant, which I bring in as Grace. And Grace was kind of a valley girl, typical. All she was really interested in was finding a man with money and getting jewelry and that sort of thing. And I think everybody knows those kind of people. It doesn't matter what job you're in, but they're there. They're in the airline too. But yeah, there's people that are lawyers that are flight attendants on their days off. People that because once you get to be able to hold a schedule, then you can easily work 2 jobs. A lot of the pilots maybe started construction companies or ran large farms, or, did other jobs, and they actually had another job. Maybe some of them sold real estate or were real estate brokers. So because our job allows us to bid our schedule, to bid our days off, it's kind of like, well, I want to bid to work my other job Monday through Friday, so I'll work Saturday, Sundays, or, that sort of thing. So there's a lot of different jobs. I worked with several advanced trauma and cardiac care nurses that were top of the line in their field. But because they were a lot senior, they had maybe 30 years seniority. They could bid to fly a low schedule. When I say low schedule, maybe 67 hours or maybe 70 hours a month flying, which they could accomplish in just a couple, 2 or 3 trips.
But then also they have the benefits of the airlines. I'm curious, what are the benefits? I mean, we hear that flight attendants, they can fly wherever they want for, next to nothing. But be a little more specific as to what an airline person can do, both pilots and do pilots have more benefits than flight attendants?
Well, no, and it's kind of a misnomer that you fly for free, although you kind of can if you want to fly on a jump seat, but that's not the most comfortable way to go. But it's kind of more of a guarantee where you can go. And prior to 9/11, the pilots actually could pretty much get on and ride in a jump seat in the cockpit if there was a jump seat open, and you could reserve those. A lot of airlines changed all of that after 9/11, so I don't know what they're doing, which each airline's doing now. But in general, flight attendants and pilots both have the same travel benefits, and that would be the company would set a price tag on a domestic flight. Say you could go from anywhere you wanted from A to B on a ticket that cost you a set price. If you were in coach, it may be $15 or $20, or if you were in first class or business class, it would be a little bit more. So, and you could go, if you went international, then there's another bracket where that would go. So every airline's a little bit different, but usually you have to pay a very nominal fee. I know a lot of people years ago, you say, oh, you just pay the taxes. I don't know if it worked out that. We just had a standard. Most airlines have like a standard fee for coach or first class.
Now, I have a niece who works in the airline. I think she's a reservation agent, but her parents are allowed to fly on that particular airline, or some airlines, I don't know. But my sister actually has the ability to fly, and she uses that because her daughter is working with the airline.
Right.
Now, how does that work?
Well, the same airline people, it doesn't matter what you do for the airline, you all have the same flight benefits in general, except ground people can't sit in the cockpit. And other people, only flight attendants can sit on a flight attendant jump seat, for example. I think that's probably system-wide across the country. So if you're a reservations agent, or you're a ramp person, or a ticket agent, or a flight attendant, or a pilot, or a mechanic, there's mechanics too, you get the same benefits. So on your days off, and everybody gets to bid their schedule to kind of build what days they want to work, and it all centers around seniority. And so that's why, as far as the 9/11 thing goes, there was some red flags for me, because a lot of the people that were involved in the crew were not senior enough to hold a schedule. And one of the things about those particular flights that were transcontinental flights over to California, spending the night, coming back the next day, a 2-day trip, transcontinental, is quite senior, especially on a Tuesday, Wednesday.
Now, I've heard you mention, not being able to hold a schedule. I'm a little confused. What does that really mean? And, if you're a junior person just starting out, you've been a flight attendant for a week and a half, and you're bidding, but you're bidding against all these people that are far more senior than you, what kind of schedule are you going to have at that point? And how long does it take you to get to where you basically can, fly to London once a week, and, that's your schedule, or fly to Japan once a week, and, you don't have to do the crappy little puddle jumpers?
Well, that, again, varies by the airline, the type of flying that they do, and because some airlines just fly domestic, one type of aircraft. For instance, Southwest Airlines. They only fly the 737 and inside the United States. I don't know that they're doing any international stuff. They may. I don't fly, so they may have.
I think maybe they go to Mexico.
They may
and
have
stuff, but
picked up something like that.
But
now.
they certainly don't fly to China yet.
Yes, exactly. So if you're like United or American, you can fly domestic. You can be a flight attendant or you can be a purser. And so you can fly international. And what happens is, depending upon the size of your base and the seniority of that base. For example, if you're in Los Angeles or you're in San Francisco, it's a more senior base with every company than, say, Newark. And you would be in the most junior base at a place like Newark. And maybe Dallas-Fort Worth would be the next most junior base.
So do you get to decide where your base is, or does the airline assign you a particular base?
Initially, when you get out of training, you're assigned a base, and then you can go through the system as you've been employed, and you have now a seniority date and a seniority number. You can request to be transferred when spots open up. Let's just say you're out of training and you're based in New York, and it's very expensive and you're not making very much money, and you got 12 roommates in a 1-bedroom studio apartment. That's the kind of stuff that you kind of have to go through at the beginning. And you really want to be based in San Francisco. But the most junior person in San Francisco has been flying for 18 years. And I kid you not, that could be the case. So it's going to take you a long time to get there. So your next best bet would be to get into, another base. Let's just say, Chicago. And you think, well, I've got an aunt there. It's not too bad. I don't mind winters. I really like the pizza, so you'll put in for that. And then, spend time there if you don't want to be in New York. And then just wait until the position opens up.
So if you are a very junior person and you're based in Newark or someplace around the New York metropolitan area, what kind of flights are you going to be able to take and bid for and hold? I mean, you say you can't fly you can't fly from Newark to Los Angeles if you've only been a flight attendant for 6 months to a year.
As a schedule.
So
you could fly it as a reservist, though. And every airline...
What's the difference?
Well, every airline is different. Once you have enough seniority to hold a flight schedule, then you can go in, and it's usually there's every airline's a little bit different on this, but you usually go into a computer system and you bid and say, I want to fly this particular pattern or sequence, which would be, say, flight 11 out, flight 12 back in, using the 9/11 stuff, on Tuesday and Wednesday. And that particular sequence would be given a number. And then you would bid to have, I want that number on that day. It's like a trip number.
But if somebody more senior than you bids the exact same thing, you get kicked out?
Right. You have to have enough seniority. If there's, let's say flight 11 had 9 flight attendants on board. So if you're in the top 9 in seniority, then you can hold that. But if you're, number 25, you don't get it. You're not going to hold that particular trip. Certain trips are more senior than others. For instance, usually going outbound on a Tuesday is a lighter load, so it's less work, and that usually goes more senior, which was the case on 9/11. So that's kind of how that works. It's kind of complicated, and every airline's just a little bit different how they do it, but it's kind of I looked at it like it's a wish list, and depending upon how much seniority you have, you can pick a better trip. Now, you were asking me about what kind of trip can you first fly as a schedule when you're junior. Well, a lot of times those are trips that are like 6 stops a day on a smaller aircraft, a RJ or a 737 or something like that. And you literally would make 5 or 6 stops a day and have a very short layover domestically and then get up and do it again. And that might be 4 days in a row of that. That's hard flying.
So one of the things that I've heard you say is that on 9/11, there were a number of really junior flight attendants that had no business being on that particular flight, because really flying on, say, flight 11, cross country like that, was a really senior position. Somebody had to have been in the airlines for, 15, 20 years to be able to hold that. Is that correct?
Yeah, I would say, I'm going to guess with both of the airlines involved, maybe a dozen years, 10 to 12, maybe. You could be a junior. But yeah, some of the people that were crew members had 30 plus years or so.
So how do you explain the fact that people that had been flying for a year or less were actually crewed to fly those planes that day? I mean, how do you explain it?
Well, I'm not positive that I have an explanation other than some of them needed to be there. And so, and that goes a little bit deeper than I'm willing to go at this particular time because I'm still diving into that, and I'm really going to cover it in depth in the nonfiction book. So,
but logically, they shouldn't have been and couldn't have been there.
That's correct.
Right?
That's correct. And there were
there's a red flag.
There were more than 50% of the flight attendants that got a last minute call that had similarities. They got a last minute call and they didn't have enough seniority to get there, and that's a real high rate for a reservist to be called in or last minute replacements. But 50% is a lot of the whole. I think there were 25 flight attendants, and at least 13 or 14 were last minute call ups. And they also had some interesting history that kind of correlates together.
So typically, maybe 5%, 2%, that are last minute call ups that are reservists that are going to fly. Now, these are people, let's say somebody calls in sick and says, that had bid a flight, and they'd been around for a long time and they could hold it, but they called in sick. And so the scheduler is going to call a reservist maybe.
That's right. That's how it would work.
And you say 50% is just way out of the standard deviation for that. So what is the typical?
You might have one or two.
One or two instead of
50%.
15 or 20.
Yeah.
Okay.
13 or 14 out of the 25.
So the alarm bells are going.
Yeah, well, and that's one of the interesting things about 9/11 is that the most of the pilots were all last minute call ups, and that gets kind of complicated. And again, I'm going to cover it in the nonfiction, but once you've been assigned a trip and it's on your schedule, and also this works for a reserve, when you are on reserve, it's on call. You're on call to be called up to crew any aircraft that you're qualified on. Now, some airlines, you have to qualify, for instance, to fly over water. So if a flight to Hawaii opened up and you weren't qualified, they would go down to the next person that was over water qualified. So there's different positions like that come into play a little bit too, but it still all goes down the line in seniority order. So if your number is up, so to speak, and the flight opens up and they need you and you're qualified on that aircraft, they will call you up and say, you're going to go on this trip, but they're not going to then, once they give it to you, take it away for any reason, which is another thing we saw in 9/11.
Now, I want to know about the pilots, for example. If you become a pilot, and I assume when you start out, you're a very junior pilot and you're in the right seat, meaning you're the co-pilot. And, you work your way up and the object is to get into the left seat, become a pilot. Now, are there left seat pilots that are less senior than co-pilots? Does that happen? Or does it work up? How does that work? If you're a co-pilot, you become a pilot and everybody else is below you as a co-pilot? Am I making sense?
No. but it's a very confusing thing. So let me try to make it make sense to you because it is kind of confusing. Seniority on an aircraft for the pilots is left seat as the captain or right seat as the first officer or the co-pilot. So those are two different positions. After you get qualified to become a captain, once you get enough seniority to be a captain, and then you've got the ladder of the different aircraft, and each aircraft usually holds a different pay rate. So what did everybody want to do? They want to get the longer trips, the higher pay, and so that's kind of the drive in general. But there's always going to be people that want to stick to flying a 737 because that's the plane they love, and they don't want to get into a 777 or a 767 or even the 757.
Okay, now
that's a
let me see if I can explain this. Let's say I join the airline as a pilot in January, and you join the airline as a pilot in June. So we're 6 months apart, but I'm more senior than you because I've been there 6 months longer. Now, could you become and we're both flying in the right seat and just having a grand old time. Could you become a pilot before me?
A captain.
I mean, a captain before me?
If I went to a different airplane, an aircraft, and you stayed on one, you could probably do that. Because there's not just the left and right seat. There's different airplanes that people will qualify on. So if you're qualified as a 737 captain and you wish to stay there, or you're qualified as a 737 first officer or co-pilot, and you decide, I love this position, you don't have to ever be the captain, but the ego usually drives you to it. And then the paycheck gets bigger.
Would I still be more senior than you, even if you became a captain?
Well,
and
and
I was
see,
still
that's
a
where
co-pilot?
seniority splits away from, because you're talking apples and oranges. The captain's an apple, the first officer's an orange. And then when you throw in the fruit basket of the 737, 747, 757, 67, 77, and then the Airbuses and all the different aircraft. So it's very, very complicated. I think I've made my point to you on that. However, the most important thing I'm trying to relate this back to 9/11 now. The most important thing, I think, in 9/11 is that there were several pilots that had bid to fly those flights that were removed by the company without explanation. And that does not happen, just as the captains that were called up at the last minute, even though they bid to have September 11th off because they had a party planned, or they had some kind of big meeting planned, or something on their farm planned, or something like that.
Or they're going to the dentist.
Or the dentist. You never know. I mean, you bid your days off and they're yours. And so all of those pilots on 9/11 were senior enough to not ever have the company call them up and say, we're going to make you fly on your day off, because that doesn't happen. So who did call them? That's the question that everybody should be asking. Who made that phone call? When was the decision made to pull this off, the whole 9/11 event? Because there was a lot of scrambling done, and there were a lot of people that were taken off the trips that shouldn't have been. We talk about a purser in Methodical Illusion. There's a story about a purser who was commuted. Now, it's common. That's how we'll talk about that for a few seconds. It's common for us because we begin, after you get in there for a year or two, you start looking at an airplane and you start looking, oh, New York to Miami, that's only 3 hours. Hey, what the heck? I can do that. You start to look at airplanes as buses. And it's like, oh, I can commute to Paris. I actually flew with people that commuted from Europe, several cities in Europe, to several cities in the United States as a commute. They would come into the United States and bid to fly. They're flying back to back. In between, they'd stay in hotels, commuter hotels, or a commuter apartment with other airline people, and get their flying done in 9 or 10 days, and then they'd go back to Europe and live.
So let me make sure I understand this. If I was a pilot, a left seat pilot with lots of seniority, and I bid to fly from Boston to San Francisco, or Boston to Los Angeles, and that's my schedule, and I'm going to hold it, and all of a sudden the airline calls up and says, Ramjet, you're out. We're putting Rebecca Roth in. She's going to fly that. You mentioned that's just absolutely highly unusual. Doesn't happen. If that had happened, I would have had the right to pitch a holy tizzy fit, right?
Yeah, there's union contracts that cover stuff like that. So there's an agreement with the company. When I bid to have my flying or my days off, such and such, when I bid to have that off, or to have my schedule on such a flight or what have you, that's mine in my seniority order. The company cannot come at you and say, they can do that if there's some weird thing. For instance, after 9/11, we had airplanes parked all around the world with no crews because everybody had been sitting for 5 or 10 days or longer, trying to get flights passengers, crew members, everybody going. So everybody kind of did something very different. But that's about the only time I can think of in my 30 plus years that things were not as they should be. And you really didn't have the ability because everything wasn't up and running. So it was very unusual. But prior to 9/11, on September 10th, if you were a pilot and you were on a schedule to fly that, the company would not change that for you. And that happened.
So if that was my situation and they changed that and I'm ready to pitch a holy tizzy fit and I'm all ready to just absolutely come unhinged, and then I find out the plane flew into a building and everybody died, I'm not quite as upset as I might have ordinarily been.
Probably
Is that right?
wouldn't have filed a grievance on that. Exactly. And there are pilots that have come out now and spoken about it. And keep in mind that after 9/11, I think that a lot of people that should have been or were supposed to be or at the last minute didn't get on or last minute had their trip removed from them have now had to deal with the survivor's guilt. And because a lot of them don't know the truth of what really happened that day, they don't know that some of those crew members were allowed to live. So they're still suffering from the survivor guilt. And yeah, they didn't complain, but that was not a customary understood event. And I can think of one of the captains who had a very large event going, had people coming in from foreign countries, from Asia, visiting his farm. And in the last minute, the afternoon or early evening of the September 10th, he got a phone call. We don't know who called him. And he was told he had to be on one of those flights. And his wife actually was a flight attendant, so she would know that that's not right. But she just kind of went away. I don't know. I was like, I'm not going to question it. But then again, afterwards, a lot of those pilots and flight attendants were raised up as heroes. They were just flying a trip. They didn't do anything right. So I never could figure out why they were heroes because they never followed protocol. They didn't if they were heroes, here's what would happen. The hijackers would have been taken out, killed, incapacitated, one or the other. The planes would have landed safely, and we would still have those people with us today. That's a successful hijacking, and that's what the protocols were made to do, and that's why when they didn't follow protocol, people started wondering why they didn't. And if you look at that, I think it's pretty clear now that we know what we've learned in Book 4, why this was a success in some people's eyes, but not in others, because maybe the whole idea of the success was pulling off something that looked like what they showed us, bit of a hoax. So there you go. That's we're going to end this one right here, and this will be number 1, and then we'll be just going to continue this on. We're going to talk about, so you guys can understand a lot of stuff. We'll talk a lot about everything that came through all 4 books. All right, part 2 of the Christmas special. All right, we're going to continue on talking about a little bit about the airline stuff.
Oh, I thought Ramjet was going to sing Jingle Bells.
Maybe later. Maybe at the very end. Okay, so what I want to talk, kind of explain to you this time on this one is about the first half of Methodical Illusion and why did I write that the way it was. I decided that the best way to introduce all the information that I'd uncovered just in my research about 9/11, and a lot of it was open source, stuff that had been out there. But one of the things I had to do was also to weed through this crazy conspiracy theories, and a lot of them were written by people that have maybe never flown or only flown a half a dozen times in their life, but haven't done it professionally, didn't know what how an airline operates or what we do. And so if you think about this in the first half or so of Methodical Illusion, I take you into the catacombs of the airline, where the glamour hides from you. You don't get to see it. It's where we go to check in. And what I wanted to do was explain to you so that you would understand this too. So when you see some goofy professor talking about flight attendants being kidnapped and voice morphed and all this nonsense, you will understand how it works. So I want to kind of explain a little bit about
basically,
that.
when you were talking about, back in the catacombs, I don't think there was any glamour there, was there? I mean, the couches were old, the tables and chairs were kind of a mess. Been around since about 1430, and there's newspapers all over the place. I don't know if that's where the glamour hides.
You can tell I was being facetious, right?
Make sure I don't ever get invited down there.
Here's the funny thing, because all airlines are kind of the same. That I probably had at least a half a dozen or more different airline employee company people say, did you fly for A, B, or C? Because that's exactly what our office was like. So just so you understand how this works, and it's not always the same. One of my offices was located in a different area than this, but this is often the case. And the reason for that is that there's these offices down underneath the terminal. And that's on the same level as the tarmac. And there's reasons for that. And it does all make really good sense, because the luggage handlers, the mechanics, the operation dispatchers, we all have access to the tarmac by an outside stairs that leaves the jetway. If you get to the airplane and you look off to your right, there's usually on the right. Sometimes it'll be on the left, but oftentimes it's on the right. And there's a door there before you get onto the airplane. You see the airplane doors open, and if you look on both sides, you'll find a door. It looks like it usually has a window in it, a door, and that door opens to a stairs. And so we would be able to come and go. The pilots can access to do their walk around, their pre-flight walk around. We always joked that they would just go down and kick the tires. That's not all they would do, but to make sure that everything was good. There weren't holes, or we hadn't hit a bird, or there wasn't something wrong with missing bolts or something. Flat tires, yeah, and that could be those, because they get found too. Sometimes tires will go flat on a landing. So before the plane takes off, one of the pilots has to go and do a walk around, and that's how they get down there. So it does make sense that, offices are often down there, and they're often, not the fanciest places. So, we don't stay down there very long, unless you're waiting for a flight to go somewhere and you don't want to sit in the terminal. You can sit down in a crew lounge area. So let me just tell you what would happen, just so you guys can know, because I think that it's important that we dispel some of the conspiracies and why you understand that this is kind of how this works. If you, as a flight attendant, have been given a flight, whether you bid for it on your schedule or you were on reserve or picked it up off of some sort of open flying system, like if there's crew positions open because the flight becomes full or because somebody's sick, there's a position, an open board or a open flying system where you could go in, and if you needed to build up your schedule because maybe you'd gotten sick or you're making up sick time or wanted extra flying time that month, you could go in and say, oh, there's an open trip right there, I'll pick that up. If you have the seniority, when you go in and request it, it works usually that way. So let's just say you've got a trip on your schedule on September 11th and your departure time is 8 a.m. Well, what happens, and I think this is important that people understand, is that, and it depends on the airline you're with and the time. So don't hold me. This is not, if United's a little bit different, or American's a little bit different, or Southwest's a little bit different. Every airline's a little bit different. But just to give you an example, if your departure with your passengers on board and the door shut is at 8 a.m., you need to be on that airplane 45 minutes to an hour before departure. So you've got to be on the plane, let's just say 1 hour before at 7 a.m. Now the plane is leaving from the terminal, And inside that terminal is your offices, your in-flight services offices where the flight attendants check in. But before you leave your house, you have a 2-hour check-in call. So at 6 a.m., if not sooner, because sometimes it takes longer to fly or to drive to the airport. So by minimum of 2 hours, or maybe it's 2.5 for a different airline, but let's just say 2 hours, you have to call crew scheduling and say, this is Rebecca Roth. My employee number is 1267859, and I'm on sequence pattern number 122, which is flight 11. And it says, okay, you're checked in. That's 2 hours before departure. If I don't make that call, they'll call a reserve to replace me, and I'm in trouble. So I know that everybody just thinks that we're part of the airplane, but we're not. So that's kind of how that works. So if you know you're leaving on an 8 a.m. departure and you've got a 2-hour drive, or maybe bad weather, it's 2.5 or 3-hour drive, you could call in at 5 in the morning and check in and say, I'm on my way. Then you need to be in the check-in lounge or at the offices where you're signing in or computer checking in. You're just typing your name and your number and your pattern number, sequence number into a computer system, or talking to a human. Sometimes there's that too. They're there. You have supervisors there. They give you your paperwork for your flight. Then you go into usually a briefing room oftentimes, and you will meet the rest of your crew. These could be people you've never seen in your life. These are people that have had the same training as you. They may have flown for 6 months, or they may have flown for 40 years. Everybody's got a seniority number, and the work position inside the airplane, however many. If you're on a double aisle airplane like a 767 and there's maybe 9 crew members, then you've got a purser, and they'd be the purser position. And then in seniority order, people choose what they like to work. Now, some people really like the aft galley. They just like to be organized and do the food stuff. Some people prefer a beverage cart and a meal cart, and they like to do it in a certain section of the airplane. So if they have enough seniority to hold their favorite position, that's how they bid to work a particular position. Some people prefer to sit in the aft 3 right jump seat, for example, like Betty Ong did. So that's what happens. So you literally have from 5 or 6 in the morning, let's just say roughly 2 to 3 hours before your scheduled departure with passengers on board and the doors shut, you're talking to people at crew scheduling who are writing you down into the computer with, here's the important thing that was never ever mentioned by any crew member on 9/11. And you heard me say it. This is Rebecca Roth, and my employee number is 1-877-654-4321, and I'm checking in for such and such a sequence. Anytime an employee from an airline talks to anybody in the airline, they give their employee number with their name. Every stinking time. And that's the one thing that we never saw anybody do on 9/11, and there's no reason they didn't. That's a logical reason. So you see how hard it would be to be kidnapped, right? Most of the time, not all of the time, but most of the time, our offices are located on the secure side of security, or they're in if they're not on the secure side of security, they're on, let's just say I can think of one office. It was a mezzanine level. Above the ticket counter level, there's a mezzanine level where you had to know the code to get the elevator to move up to that level. And then you had to know the specific code to get into the office. So only airline employees, or in this case, only flight attendants and our support supervisors and that sort of thing could get into those offices. So they were particularly on the secure side of security, but they were in secure offices. So nobody could just come in and grab you because they'd have to have all the codes to get in. And there were different codes to get into the elevator and also in the specific office that you had. So the idea of somebody kidnapping an entire crew member, and that's one thing I wanted to do when I brought Vera into a meeting and where she waited and met Grace Lewis. Was that she was sitting down there in kind of the catacombs waiting area where the vending machines are, and there's old newspapers or magazines that maybe were torn and they were from the airplane, but some little child got into them and ripped them. Well, rather than throw them away, they'll throw them down into the crew lounge area where we sit and wait for, to go crew a flight or go commute on a flight.
So if somebody were going to hijack or kidnap, I should say, if somebody were going to kidnap an entire crew, it'd be kind of like herding cats. Or I can just imagine, it's like,
actually impossible.
It's like you would see, sometimes mothers have children with harnesses on in the grocery store. And so you'd have 9 or 10 or 15 flight attendants with their little harnesses on. That's how you would go about hijacking them, right?
Well,
in other words, it is impossible.
It is impossible. It's such a ludicrous idea. And that's when I realized that the 9/11 event was filled with, I can think of 3 right off the top of my head, of professors that had no idea how we go to work and what happens when we go to work and how in touch we are with the airline. I mean, they just had no idea. And so that was such a ludicrous conspiracy theory that when I found that, I thought, oh my God, this is crazy. What else don't they know? And what else do they think? So I just wanted to kind of dispel that, because it's not just like we just, throw on our uniform and decide to go to an airport terminal and get on a plane. That's not how it works. It's very organized. And by the way, we bid for our schedule like a month in advance. So usually by the 20th or maybe the 23rd of November, let's say, we'll know exactly what our schedule is for the month of December. And then same for January. We will know by there's a bid cutoff date, and somewhere usually between the 18th and the 24th of the month prior, and then you'll know.
Now, in Methodical Illusion, you paint the picture of an airplane flying into the Patriot Hotel, and the First Lady essentially is killed. Now, that's obviously just part of the novel. That didn't really happen. We don't have a First Lady that was killed in Las Vegas. But then you follow that up, because Vera is flying back from Japan, and she's landing. I don't remember exactly where she was, coming into, but she has a security briefing. How realistic is that?
Well, I put that in there so that people could understand initially, and especially if you're flying, you're 7 miles off the surface. In those days, in 2001, we didn't have any Wi-Fi on board, so we were really out of touch. If cell phones didn't work, especially in her case, she was flying in from Asia. It's a long flight, 10, 12 hours, 14 hours. It depends upon, where you're leaving from and where you're landing at. But, roughly 12 hours in the air without knowing what's happening on the surface of the earth. So you don't know if there's been a volcano eruption or an earthquake, or you just are detached from the news, because we didn't have Wi-Fi in those times. So what happened when there was an incident, what I wanted to do was kind of show people how long it takes for everybody in the airline. And we had a saying, let the press be damned. Every company has a spokesperson that speaks to the press about any event. We don't. Not the baggage handlers, not the ticket agents, not the flight attendants, not the pilots. None of us are to speak to the press. And so I wanted to kind of bring in how out of touch you are when you come in from a long flight like that. Something has happened involving your company, and yet you're going to walk through the airport terminal to commute home, like Vera was commuting back to the West Coast in her uniform, and you're going to get asked questions. Strangers are going to stop you and say, oh, you're with the airline involved in that incident. What happened? And stuff like that. So I wanted to kind of just portray 2 things there that they didn't quite have all the details to give any details to the crew that had come in. Again, to remind them, let the press be damned. Don't talk to anybody. We have spokespersons that do that. And how it affected people emotionally, that they lost a plane full of passengers and crew members that we all probably knew it to one degree or the other. Sometimes you fly, if you particularly fly a Friday, Saturday, Sunday trip, and you're with other moms that want to fly Friday, Saturday, Sunday trip because that gives them the rest of the week to get their kids to, football practice or ballet lessons or, whatever, pick up their kids at school and take them, as we do as parents. So it's oftentimes if you're flying one particular sequence or pattern, A to B, on certain days, like Friday, Saturday, Sunday, Monday, you'll be flying with the same people. But that's not always the case. It's oftentimes you'll get on, you won't know anybody in your crew. You've never seen them before in your life. And even flying 30 years, you could get on an airplane with a dozen other people and never have flown with one of them before.
Well, one of the other things I thought you did really well in that book is you made it known to the reader that flight attendants and pilots, it's all one big family. It's not like a football team. It's not like the Giants against the Jets. I mean, you don't root for one and not the other. So if you're from American or United or Delta or wherever you're from, if something bad happens to one of those particular airlines, you all feel it. Is that right?
Oh, yeah. It is a huge family. And it's funny because now, I've since I've written the books, I've become friends with lots of family members, crew members from all over, all kinds of airlines all over. We all kind of talk the same language, and we all have had the same experiences. For example, just the other night, I have a friend that had flown in and has an hour-and-a-half drive home. So we did a FaceTime audio and literally talked the whole way, her commute home driving. She'd flown in from Europe. And now that I got off the phone, only 2 flight attendants could do that like we just did. And the time just flew. And that we were talking about lots of different things. But, for me, I can sit back and I'm so glad I'm not doing that anymore. But I can relate to every experience that she had on her flight and on the layover. So yeah, it's kind of interesting, and it doesn't matter if you're in Australia or England or Germany. If you can all talk the same language, we do talk the same language. We are one big family, and so whenever something happens, like 9/11 happened, I wasn't working for one of the airlines that it happened to, but we were all involved, and we were all touched, much more so than the passengers, because it was our life. It was our world. And so our world really got changed upside down, backwards, and inside out, much more so than you would notice as traveling as a passenger. I know your life's changed a little bit with, having to take off your shoes or your belt or whatever. But ours really, really did, because I think in a lot of aspects we realized that what we were told and what we'd experienced before, when you need jets scrambled, they usually are on your wingtip of 6 minutes, maybe 10 at the max, to help guide you down to safety. When what we all experienced, I think collectively across the country, was that what we thought was a safety net. And I covered this in Methodical Deception. When Vera decides it's time to retire, not only was she hooking up with the president who had lost his wife, but it was time to retire because she knew the truth. Well, she knew a lot of it. She didn't know all of it at that book, but she knew that the most important thing is that what we were told and shown and what had been the situation in the previous years, and that would be 30 plus years, was that the military was going to scramble and be there and help us, and the air traffic control system was set up so that everything, our code words, everything was done right, and we practiced all that hijacking protocol every year, and that it was going to work because it always worked, but didn't get used that day. And what I think a lot of us saw was there was a system that was broken, and so we lost a lot of confidence in a way, I guess, and the system that was there to protect our passengers and ourselves.
Well, one of the other things I think you brought out in that book was, you mentioned, methodical deception and or thinking about retiring. But one of the things that, she wasn't able to do was basically look passengers in the face and be confident with the fact that all of our systems are going to work, because they didn't work on 9/11.
And no explanation why they didn't. There's never been a logical explanation. I remember, because I flew for several years afterwards, I never could understand why it was that nobody in air traffic control or in the military, in the Pentagon, nobody lost their job. But on the other hand, most everybody that didn't do their job correctly on that day, by scrambling jets immediately, realizing that they had no radio contact with these planes right away. I mean, they didn't understand what was going on. They were totally confused, and they dropped the ball at air traffic control. And instead of losing their jobs, they got promoted. And that's everywhere, from in the Pentagon, in the military, on up. That nobody lost their job. And that was another thing I thought, that, but yet they built these crew members up to be heroes. And I think, well, how could they be heroes? A hero would have landed the plane and everybody would have got off safely. A flight attendant hero, would have told us how somebody got into the cockpit if they did, but nobody ever said that they did. This was something that we were told, but the flight attendants didn't tell us that. So there were things, and then all the 302s that have been changed. I mean, the story has just absolutely morphed, and I think it started morphing when somebody that day realized that cell phones did not work above about 15 to 1,800 feet elevation, which is like the first three to 5 seconds of your flight.
Well, as a flight attendant and as a pilot, you fly every week or maybe 2 or 3 times a week, and you see all kinds of different people. I mean, you probably, in your 30-year career, you probably saw 10 million people on flights. And yet, you kind of portrayed a sense that you are very protective of those passengers, even though you don't really know them and may never see them again. Explain that to me a little bit, the protective nature that pilots and flight attendants have over their passengers. And if there's a problem, your job is to protect them.
Well, it's the magic of that uniform. And I think police officers and firefighters understand exactly what I'm saying. You no longer are the wife, the sister, the mother. Once you put that uniform on, you've got a whole different ball game going on. You've got a whole different set of priorities. And so we are really literally not just there to serve you a Coke and 7-Up, but we are there to give you CPR, to shock you back to life with a defibrillator, to give you the Heimlich technique, to stop the bleeding if you have an incident where, we're in turbulence and all of a sudden some part of the ceiling panel falls down and cuts your arm or your leg. If you're choking on food, we can take care of that with the Heimlich technique. If something catches on fire in the cabin, we will put that fire out. We'll be your firefighter. We'll be your nurse. We'll be your psychologist. If you're freaking out because you're scared to death of flying, for whatever reason, we'll set you down in our jump seat and hold your hand so we can do a little bit of jump seat therapy and be your psychologist. And we are a babysitter, and sometimes we have to change people's diapers. We are just everything on that plane, because when you're 35,000 feet above the earth, there isn't anybody else to help you but us.
But in relation to 9/11, with all the events that were taking place, those feelings and those protective innate situations would have transpired even then, no matter what was going on with Arab hijackers or whatever. Is that correct?
Oh, yeah. Well, if there was, we had protocols to follow, and that's why I've said this a gazillion times. None of the crew members followed the protocol. And the most interesting thing is, it's truly, I sat in the jumpsuit so many times that it was second nature. It was like breathing to me to say jump seat, sit in the jump seat. Betty was sitting in her jump seat, but that's not what she should have done in a real hijacking, because the protocol was to sit down and not draw attention to yourself. Look like a passenger and go to sleep. Look like you're asleep. Cover up your uniform. Take off your name tag and your wings. Cover up with a coat or a blanket, even if you have to borrow one from the overhead bin. Leave that hijacker with one flight attendant only. That's not what we heard. All the crew members walking back and forth. We heard Betty sitting in her jump seat. She should have been in one of the nearly 100 empty passenger seats covered with a blanket. She was not only sitting in her jump seat, in her uniform, talking on a phone. That is a great way to get killed. But it didn't happen, did it? Not then, anyway, while she was on the phone for 27 minutes. But when you start to look at this, and I mean, I looked at this for a long time before I realized you're supposed to sit down and not draw attention to yourself. That doesn't mean sitting in your jump seat. That's the last place you would sit. You need to sit in a passenger seat so you don't look like a crew member. That was our protocol. Now, she'd been flying like roughly 12 years, so she'd gotten that training over and over and over every year. She knew the code words. Maybe the reason that their scenario was painted for them that the pilots weren't answering is because the pilots don't know what's going on in the cabin because we're their eyes and ears. The door is locked. It always was locked. We had the keys to get into the cockpit, and there was only a peek hole for them. And they're sitting taken off. They're sitting looking forward. They're not interested. They don't even know what's happening in the cabin unless we tell them. And so that's why we had the designated code words and the protocol step by step to let them know there was somebody in the that we would refer to as a hijacker. There was no such thing as a terrorist in aviation at the time of 9/11. We would have referred to them as a hijacker and followed the hijack protocol set in stone. None of that happened. Like I said, a successful ending, for if they were heroes, they would have told us. One, if they were in the cockpit, nobody said they were. People on the ground said they were, but later on we found out that those people worked for the Department of Defense. The story grew legs later on, but they never told us how they got in the cockpit, if they were in the cockpit at all. So they didn't do the right thing. They should have not been. Now, you know that Betty Ong, if you listen to the 4.5-minute tape, if you listen to that tape, you can hear someone there. She says he's coming back. He, as in one hijacker, he's coming back from business, and the flight attendants there, and you can hear a couple flight attendants talking back and forth when she's on the phone. Again, every single flight attendant except the one dealing with the one hijacker would have been sitting down, hiding out, not drawing attention to themselves, looking like a passenger, preferably asleep.
Well, it's now been 18 years, or will be in September of this next year, and it's still, that story is still growing legs. Those legs are so long, Daddy Long Legs don't even come close to what it is. I mean, the story continues to morph, and you wonder, how does that happen? How do you get a story that it can't be changed because people are dead or events have come to finality, and yet the story continues to change?
Yeah, well, I guess I revert back to Operation Mockingbird because the CIA did this, and the CIA controls the media. So everything that's written or spoken about 9/11 and why it changes is coming from that same source. So on that, I'm going to close this one off and try to keep these about a half hour long so that you guys don't spend all your holiday. But, I still want you to give the information. And, if there's at the end of this, if you still have questions, put them in the chat room.